Well, welcome back everyone to day 2. We're starting this morning with a panel discussion on roadblocks to STEM graduate student retention. I'm grateful to Jerry Richmond, who's chair of our External Engagement Committee, for initiating and orchestrating this discussion. And in fact, for turning engagement with the research community into a standing NSB meeting highlight. So I'll now turn the floor over to Jerry so she can introduce her speakers.
Great, thanks, Ellen. When we started putting this panel together, Ellen immediately sprang to mind as the perfect person to host it. I'm having a little bit of background noise. Does that make sure everyone's muted?
Yeah, if we can make sure everyone's muted. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so Alan immediately came to mind as someone who could really help us with this panel. As many of you know, he was CEO of American Academy Association of Advancement of Science, AAAS, for 13 years, evolving it in exciting new directions. He's also served for 12 years on the National Science Board. I had the thrill of serving with him, appointed by President Bush and reappointed by President Obama. Now, Alan has long thought and written about graduate STEM education and about needed changes, as we'll talk about today, such as the focus of a wider range of skills beyond those needed for graduate research. And he chaired the 2018 National Academy's report on graduate STEM education for the 21st century, which I advocate everyone to read. Alan, we are so pleased to have you back on the board and to host this important panel, so please take it away.
You muted, Alan.
I'm much more articulate that way. Nice to see everybody. Nice to be with you all. It's sort of like old home week and feels terrific. So welcome everybody to this panel on roadblocks to STEM graduate student retention. My first job is to ask everybody to turn off your camera and mute yourself during the presentations. So the issue is a big one. There are a number of disconnects that are plaguing graduate STEM education, the preparation of the future workforce at the moment, and I won't go through those in great detail, but some of them will come up. Among the biggies is the problem of retention and how do we retain the best and brightest in STEM fields. Whether you think of STEM fields as coming from the skilled technical workers, for academic researchers, or the number of PhDs who are working in a, by now, myriad of other sectors. There are many things that NSF can do, that the National Science Board can do. I had the pleasure of chairing the report, as Jerry pointed out, of the National Academies that talked about sort of restructuring graduate STEM education for the 21st century. And I'm delighted to point out that 2 of our speakers today were members of that committee. The panelists today are going to focus primarily on the issue of retention. There are, as Jerry said, a number of other interesting and important issues that I think all of you can help us work on. The first speaker today is going to be Dr. Kenneth Gibbs, who's chief of the Undergraduate and Predoctoral Cross-Disciplinary Training Branch at the National Institutes of Health. He's overseen a variety of training programs focused on increasing diversity across educational levels. He was one of the members of our National Academies report. Our second speaker, Renetta Garrison Tull, is Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, University of California, Davis. She's a co-author of another Academy report, a very important one, on the science of effective mentoring in STEM. I recommend that report to everybody. Third panelist will be Suzanne Ortega, who's president of the Council of Graduate Schools. Suzanne has a long history in higher education leadership, including having been a very successful graduate dean herself. Suzanne was also a member of our committee and will speak on broad training needed for graduate students. The final panelist will be Selena Gray, a Blackfeet Métis member and a master's graduate student at the University of Montana's Wildlife Biology program. She's a policy advocate across multiple digital media platforms for tribal colleges and their students who face financial hurdles. Ms. Gray is going to speak about roadblocks that she and other graduate students have and continue to face. Each panelist is going to speak for 5 minutes. We'll do them sequentially. And after the panelists have spoken, we'll invite board members to turn their cameras back on, and I'll open it up to a Q&A session with the board members. So with that, let's start with Dr. Gibbs. Kenny?
Thank you so much, Alan. I'm pleased to be here. If you could start the slides, that would be very helpful. Great. So good morning to you all. It's good to be here digitally. I'm Kenny, and I'm going to share a little bit about what we've done at NIGMS to enhance graduate recruitment and retention for a diverse and skilled workforce. For those of you who aren't familiar, NIGMS is the basic science component of NIH, and so we focus on just basic research to understand how biology works. We're not really concerned with diseases, body parts, or life stages like the rest of the NIH. And so we're sometimes, for that reason, called the NSF of NIH. NIGMS provides leadership in training the next generation of scientists, as well as enhancing diversity in the scientific workforce. And so that means annually we spend about $350 million on over 1,000 research and training and diversity enhancing awards at institutions across the country. And one of our motivations is to ensure that everybody has opportunity. And so if we go to the next slide to contribute and see what we see, and this is some data that the staff helped me pull together, but really thinking about what is representation and how does it change across the science and engineering pathway, right? And so just to orient you, on the bottom we have bachelor's degrees, in the middle master's, and on top doctoral degrees. In orange we have women. The lighter orange is women from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. So that would be Hispanic or Latina, American Indian, African American, Black, Native American, Alaska Native, Pacific Islander. And in the darker orange, we have women from white or Asian or well-represented backgrounds. And then those similar backgrounds are in blue. So what we see, if you click next, is that we see some differences across training stages. So women as a whole earned the majority of bachelor's degrees in STEM and over 41% of doctorates, which is great in 2016. Scientists from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups earned about 21% of bachelor's degrees and about 9% of doctorates. But we see, and you all are probably aware, there's a big degree of field variance. And so in life science disciplines and in psychology, which, are often overlapping with the NIH mission, we see high representation of women and scientists from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups, whereas we see lower representation of those groups in computer sciences, engineering, and physical sciences. So I'm going to share a little bit about some of the models that we have had as it relates to, again, training and attracting and retaining a diverse workforce. If you go to the next slide, you're going to see a number of different programs. And so we have programs that span the training pathway from undergrad to grad, as well as postdoc and early career faculty. Here I'm focusing on 4, 2 that are at the undergraduate stage, the URISE and MARC programs. You can see their full names there. And then 2 at the graduate or PhD stage, GRISE and IMSD. All of these programs focus on community building, mentoring, and skills development as it relates to enhancing retention for students from all backgrounds, in particular those from underrepresented groups, with really the idea of maybe enhancing this to the entire institution. If you click next, some of the mechanisms that we use, next please. Okay, thank you. We support the trainees for 1 to 3 years, and we know that financial support is really important, and so these programs provide tuition remission and stipend. Research experiences are critical, particularly at the undergrad stage, for interest in graduate work, as well as seminars, networking, career and development activities, such as going to conferences, having speakers come from a lot of backgrounds so they can have role models. We do cohort building activities because we know that community is key to persisting in science. You need community around you. And we also hope these activities help them to enhance aspects like their science identity, think of themselves as a scientist, as well as their self-efficacy. We also focus on individualized mentoring and oversight throughout the training stage. And so these are some of the programs that we have while students are either in graduate school and at the undergrad level. And just for why we have multiple programs at each stage, the RISE programs focus on research active institutions, which have research activity but more modest levels, and Mark and IMSD focus on the research intensive institutions because we want to make sure that we can support students no matter what context they're in. Finally, if you click next, we also know that we can help people who are transitioning. And so there are a large pool of students who are finished their degrees, want to go to graduate school, but want some additional training and development. And so we have a program called PREP, which is our post-baccalaureate research education program. It's an intensive 1-year research apprenticeship and skills development program. They spend 3/4 of their time in lab, 1/4 of their time doing classes or skills development. And importantly, 75% of the participants from this program progress on to biomedical PhD programs. So these are all effective models that we've developed. I'm happy to share more with you or other models. I'm happy now to turn over to my colleague, Dr. Tull.
Well, thank you very much, Kenny. So next we have Renetta Garrison Tull. Renetta, you're on.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. In addition to my work with UC Davis, I bring experience from my prior work in graduate education in Maryland, and also the study committee for the National Academy's report on the science of effective mentoring in STEM. Broadening participation in graduate education is a challenge, and preparing for recruitment in STEM graduate programs is not enough. We must also consider graduate student retention. So think about your own graduate school experience. The pursuit of a PhD and the journey through graduate school can be incredibly isolating, and more so for students from historically marginalized backgrounds where their numbers are few. The mentoring structure will be the focus here, and the information that I'm sharing comes from the National Academy's mentoring report, and the next few figures from that report also include work from commission papers by Dr. Baranda Montgomery and Dr. Stephanie Page. Next slide, please. The structure for the PhD program often includes a 2-person dyadic model consisting of a student plus a faculty advisor. We know this model well. The faculty advisor guides the student through the doctoral research, and it is a 1-to-1 apprenticeship model. But obtaining the doctorate takes years, and the dyadic model, which gives one person significant power and responsibility over another, is far from ideal. The research reveals that this 2-person model is not working. The dyadic model relies on building a 2-person relationship, which of course can take many forms, but the dyadic model can be limiting and fraught with errors that can slow a student's progression through graduate school or even halt their journey altogether if the relationship fails. The dyadic model itself can be a roadblock. A new paradigm is emerging along with an operational definition for mentoring as follows. Mentorship is a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. Next slide, please. In Figure B, triads are the simplest non-dyadic structure, and there are 2 mentors and 1 mentee, or 1 mentor and 2 mentees. Next slide. Figure C shows collective or group mentorship, which involves multiple mentors or multiple mentees with connections between and among them. Next slide. Figure D shows network mentorship, a mentee-centric perspective that shows different mentors, mentoring nodes, for example, groups of mentors, mentoring programs, as well as mentoring resources. And we encourage networks that include faculty and membership in disciplinary specific organizations such as IEEE, the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, along with, and not instead of, affinity-based organizations that provide group mentorship, such as SACNAS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Hispanics and Native Americans in Science, or NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. Further, graduate students should be strongly encouraged to freely participate in programs that both mentor them and work to improve departmental structural barriers, such as the National Science Foundation's Alliances for Graduate Education and the Professoriate, or AGEP, or the National Institutes of Health, IMSD. Let's look at 3 examples of mentoring programs. First, the Promise AGEP in Maryland, led by UMBC, includes schools throughout the University System of Maryland. And here, faculty work along with staff in the graduate school, and they create meetings as third spaces that encourage egalitarian mentoring across ranks. networks that include faculty, staff, alumni, career professionals, plus online groups of mentors such as Latinas in STEM and Vanguard STEM. And these networks of people connect to provide graduate students with advice, assist with challenges throughout the career trajectory, and celebrate milestones along the way. Second, Meyerhoff Graduate Biomedical's Fellows Program is an NIH IMSD program that includes networks of peer mentors, dissertation advisors, faculty and staff directors, along with generations of alumni, several of whom were members of the Undergraduate Meyerhoff Program and the NSF's Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, or LSAMP. And third, the newly restructured Promise Engineering Institute between UC Davis and UMBC expands these models and is developing an East-West alliance for mentors of engineering programs across California and Maryland, including a formal relationship with the American Society of Engineering Education and connecting internationally to the Latin and Caribbean Consortium of Engineering Institutions. Relationships within these programs include a faculty member, but they also include additional mentorship structures. As an update from the recent events of 2020, it's important to include anti-racism conversations in mentoring. Faculty should find ways to include and not hide from discussions and acknowledgement of identities and cultures. These conversations involve growth, understanding, and intentional inclusion, and can be incorporated into process-oriented mentorship and shared support of the student where the networks can help. Next slide. In closing, the report recommends structures which do the following. Consider the operational definition for mentoring. Use evidence-based approaches to support mentorship, a collaborative learning relationship and working alliance that includes intentionality, trust, and shared responsibility for the interactions. Have a structured feedback system with assessment and evaluation to identify areas of strength and opportunities for improvement. Recognize and respond to identities because they are relevant. Respond to, value, and build upon the power of diversity. Be culturally responsive and move beyond colorblindness, intentionally addressing socio-demographic factors. Support multiple mentorship structures. Reward effective mentorship. Department chairs and institutional leaders should consider mentorship and promotion, tenure, and performance appraisal practices. Mitigate negative mentorship experiences. Structures should be in place for neutral third-party point of contact to identify, investigate, and address negative mentoring experiences. And then for agencies, integrate mentoring tools and research. Support in-depth mentoring for cross-cultural evaluation and research related to outcomes of mentorship, particularly with regard to students from communities that have been historically marginalized. Effective mentorship is associated with positive mentee outcomes, and it involves intentionality, and it is a developed skill. Mentees and mentors should be supported by institutional changes that examine the structures and deliberately remove the roadblocks. Thank you for your attention to these remarks.
Thank you, Renetta. That was terrific. There are a lot of things to think about in that short presentation. Let's turn to Suzanne Ortega. Suzanne.
Thank you, colleagues, for this opportunity to present some high-level findings from recent studies that I hope will both intrigue and provoke your thinking. Throughout the slides, there will be hot links that give you an opportunity to find out more about study details as you're interested. Next. I'd like to begin with a quick recognition of the funders of the studies that I will be speaking from and to, and the PIs responsible for them. Next. For decades, surveys such as SED and SDR have indicated that the majority of scientists and engineers are employed outside of the academy. But here I want to focus on career transitions, their frequency, direction, and the skill sets necessary for negotiating them. Next. As you can see, there is significant movement into new jobs at all career stages. From our data, we know that most of these transitions are within sector. However, up to a third of them involves changes between sectors, and those changes are not unidirectional. A non-trivial minority of each of these cohorts move from business, government, and nonprofits to the academy, And when they do so, it is primarily into faculty roles. Next. While BGN employment and job change are not new, it is clear that the pandemic and anti-Blackness may be amplifying them. Results from recent studies suggest that the career aspirations of current STEM students are changing, with a decreased interest in academic jobs and an increase in non-academic jobs. And this is particularly pronounced for students of color and those from first-generation low-income groups. This, of course, constitutes a real challenge to our efforts to diversify the faculty. But evidence from our career transition slide suggests a possible path forward if we are smart enough to anticipate, chart, and enable multiple on-ramps at different points in time to the faculty role. Next. The good news is that the skill sets necessary to function across sectors are far more similar than they are different. Results from studies indicate, for example, that initiative, analytic thinking, integrity, innovation, and flexibility are equally important across sectors. And as you can see here, the vast majority of alumni also say that skills ranging from communication to multicultural competence are extremely important to their success in their current jobs. Yet, despite this keen awareness, a much smaller proportion of our respondents report that they actually availed themselves of professional development offerings while in school. Primary reason? They didn't know it was offered or it wasn't offered. And since we know that most major research universities have a rich suite of professional development offerings, it suggests that we need to make both students and their faculty mentors more deeply aware of them. I do want to briefly note that we will get better at professional development, but that it alone is likely to be insufficient to promote the kinds of skills we need. And I would suggest that we turn again to piloting some of the innovations suggested in the 2018 Academy's report about different modes of capstone project. Well, here I want to shift gears next to explore the linkage between career aspirations, perceived career prospects, and first, the undergraduate graduate pathway, and then secondarily, graduate student mental health and well-being. Although most remain committed to eventually attending graduate school, about 8 in 10 undergraduate research program participants indicate that they are either now less likely or more deeply uncertain about going to graduate school immediately following the baccalaureate. And I would point out the difference is far more pronounced for women than for men. The reasons appear to be concerns about their own health or that of family members, financial concerns, including job loss, again, of family and self, caregiving burdens, and once again, career uncertainty. And finally, next. Anti-Blackness is compounding the economic and health consequences of the pandemic and aggravating graduate student mental health. It's really shocking to me that Ogilvy et al.'s study found that nearly 1/3 of current graduate students report symptoms consistent with PTSD or clinically significant levels of anxiety and depression. And this means that COVID will have a long tail and require us to rethink student support services and pedagogies. So what are the implications of these 5 data points? Well, first, career uncertainty disrupts education and creates stress. Possible solution is building IDP requirements into training grants, traineeships, postdoctoral training, and fellowships. We need to revisit leave of absence policies and other policies about satisfactory progress. Second, so long as we implicitly value only the kind of science produced in traditional formats, to wit, the way we demonstrate impact to NSF or for recognition for professional honors is the coin of the realm, the peer-reviewed journal article, we send a message counter to that of career diversity. We should invest in research policy and practices that encourage new scientific formats and modes. And finally, invest in students. Finances are a huge concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And we're going to turn now to our final formal speaker, Selena Gray. Selena, please.
Okay, itamik skinato ni niraniko na Selena Gray. Nisto amskapi pikaniaki miti. I wanted to start by formally introducing myself in my Blackfeet language. I am speaking to you today from the traditional territory of not only my ancestors, but also the Confederated Salish, Kootenai, and Pend Oreille tribal lands of Missoula, Montana. 3 things really affected my path to graduate school. First of all, I chose Salish Kootenai College, a small tribal college in Montana, to pursue my bachelor's at. After the birth of my twins, I needed the support of my culture and community. Secondly, I had previous research experience under my belt and received more training because of that. And lastly, I had a couple different mentors that helped me find and pursue the right resources for me, like family-friendly research experiences, including some of the more recognizable accolades I've received, like the Udall Scholarship and the GRFP. But pursuing graduate school was a big decision for myself and my family. I had a hard time choosing where to go next. I've never really had someone telling me exactly what I needed to do to get into graduate school or even what to expect when I got here. I was being recruited by a law program in Arizona, but wasn't sure if my family could handle moving so far away from our support system here in the greater Northwest. I utilized prep classes for graduate school, and they helped open my eyes to what schools could support me. I was put onto these programs by my mentors and advisor, and these prep programs were NSF funded and ultimately got me into the top wildlife program in the nation here at the University of Montana. Mentorship has been vital to my own success, and many of my peers just weren't exposed to it like I was. So in some cases, it was up to me to share the resources and knowledge that I had and bring my peers along with me. And that's the case with my current cohort here at the University of Montana. Over the past 3 years, the Wildlife program has grown from maybe having 1 Native student in the program to now having 7 pursuing both masters and PhDs because of the connection to my tribal college, SKC, and to professional development programs focused on diversity within the Wildlife Society and the Ecological Society of America. I am also a member of SACNAS and have mentored other students in an effort to give back some of the experiences that I have had. I mentioned these professional development programs because that's the kind of thing that makes the difference for Native students. It's exposure, and beyond exposure is experience. Coming from a tribal college, access to extended education can be a difficult mold to break, even though students are in a supportive environment culturally. For me personally, when I started grad school at the University of Montana, I started off not knowing who was going to be my advisor or really what I wanted to do as a thesis. Transitioning from a reservation community to being an urban Indian was an additional culture shock beyond just my program itself. My cost of living rose by 200%, and I had entered graduate school with a family and was pregnant with our 3rd, which immediately set me apart socially. This year, I have an extra job and my husband stays at home with the kids, so some of these challenges have ironed themselves out and some haven't, especially during COVID. I will be taking an extra year to finish, and that's the reality for many Native students like myself. I am excited to start my research this summer, but because of how COVID has affected and disrupted my tribal community partners, that might change drastically. Extra support for graduate students like myself is needed both socially and financially because of this. And I would say focusing on the examples given at the tribal college level could have the biggest impact for both recruitment and retention. So I really hope you all on the board consider expanding and supporting tribal colleges and universities that are helping them build capacity and strengthening their programs through NSF programs like the TCUP program. This could lead to better success rates and retentions for students like myself that do take longer. I'd like to end by saying thank you for taking the time to listen today, and I'd be happy and I'm sure all of the panelists would be happy to answer any questions you might have for us.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Selena, and thank you to all of the panelists. I think these were very stimulating and provocative presentations with lots of messages to the National Science Board, to NSF, and to all of us to think about a problem that is persistent forever. We've trained graduate students in the same way for 100 years, and it's time to modernize and to restructure it. So we're going to turn to the Q&A session, and I'll ask the Science Board members to turn on their videos. Raise your virtual hand when you want to ask a question, and I'm going to give Jerry Richmond the first shot at the question. I'd ask everybody keep the questions short. We'll keep the answers short too. Jerry.
Well, first, I just applaud all speakers who've just done a fabulous job, just fabulous. I just want to make a quick comment when we get the questions prepared, and that is, as you know, many of the board members know I've been pushing really hard for us to get some information about retention of graduate students, and particularly, for example, to have those institutions supported by NSF funds to have to report and make public their retention rate of graduate students. And I'm happy to announce that there is a group that's been doing this for the last number of years, just a bit of a pilot program. So I put your attention to the Next Generation of Life Sciences Coalition, run by a couple of universities, and they've got this started. And so places like Michigan Tech and MIT, they've worked out the details so that all the reporting is there. So I just want to give a shout out to them because I think they've set up a model that NSF could follow. So with that, let me turn it over then to questions.
Let's start with you. You get the first shot.
So I think, Selena, you inspire us all. How do you think, in particular, we can help with students that have children? Because we don't want to make it seem like you need to go into celibacy in order to go to graduate school. How can we be more helpful to people that have families to come back to graduate school and stay in graduate school?
I would say that the most valuable experiences that I had were within labs and research experiences that included different ways to be flexible for just the family atmosphere. And there was an ease of access to things like childcare that was built into like orientation programs so that my children could be close by and I could also be participating, but close if my children needed me. And also just, regular kind of community building activities that included my husband as well, so that there was a sense of inclusion for not just myself and my children, but also my entire family as a whole.
Great, thanks, Selena.
Great, thank you. So I have two more on my list. One is Victor and then Elena Chaud. So Victor first.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you, panel. Incredible. My question is directed toward Dr. Kenneth Gibbs. Great presentation. If you're familiar with the program at NIH, the BUILD program that started back in about 2014, what's your thoughts on the BUILD program, lessons learned, and something that we could maybe look at here at NSF?
Yes, and so for those who aren't familiar, BUILD stands for Building Infrastructure Leading to Diversity. It's a common fund effort, meaning it's a 10-year experiment, and that's managed actually by NIGMS and my branch. And what the program does is that it targets schools that have a diverse population, and they came up with different experiments around how to enhance training at the student level, faculty development, as well as institutional capacity building for additional research activity, right? And so those are across the country. I think we're learning some different things, and I am happy to sort of send some additional resources to the committee, but there are models that we've seen, for example, in University of Alaska. They use this One Health model to really integrate, I think, indigenous perspectives and holistic perspectives into health research. There have been entrepreneurial models at Morgan State University to really help students take agency there. So I think we're learning There's no one way to do this. There are lots of ways. There's lots of potential. And if we have a holistic effort that focuses not just on the students, but those who are leading them in the context in which we are, you can have some really strong impacts. Hope that answers the question at a high level.
Oh,
something specific.
You did. I think also more important is also the commitment in terms of dollars. It's a big program.
Yeah, and so these tends to be the largest grants these institutions have, and they've been able to leverage them, particularly senior leadership, to get additional resources there. But yeah, there are significant grants.
Yeah, it's like 50 million per institution for over 10 years.
It's 50 million per year, so it's about 5 million per institution.
That's right.
Per year for 10, yeah, so 50 million over 10 years. Thanks.
Okay, we're gonna go to Ellen and Joe.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. I'm a little greedy, but hopefully they'll both be short. One's for Renetta. And one of the things you mentioned was about rewarding effective mentorship. And I was wondering if you knew of an example where an academic institution did that, and particularly where it counts, you know, in a tenure or promotion decision, and what information they may have collected to be able to consider that. In their decision. And then a question for Selena. You mentioned you were a member of SACNAS, and I often suggest that students, you know, look for these student chapters of organizations like that, because I do think it can provide a lot of support. And I was curious when you were able to get involved in that, whether it was as an undergrad and maybe helped with your graduate student decision, or something that you found in graduate school. So I'll turn first to Renetta.
Okay. Thank you for your question. So there are a number of mentoring awards that are given by different discipline-specific societies and organizations. And so when departments encourage their faculty to apply for those awards, and many times they require letters of validation from students, past and present, then that can help. Also, internal awards that the university provides, whether at the department level or the institutional level, those things can often come with a monetary award, some kind of academic enrichment fund, where the faculty member can use those funds for conferences, to support other students, to fund other projects, and those kinds of things. In some cases, there are financial awards that the faculty member can use in any way that they see fit. And so sometimes I would say that having these kinds of awards that are at the local level as well as at the national and international level, and then allowing those to be counted in tenure and promotion are ways to definitely reward effective mentorship. There are also mentorship scales. Many of those are outlined in the report by the National Academies. And again, they include a multifold process, because the mentor has to report, but the mentees also have a chance to provide feedback, and those kinds of things should count in a variety of different kinds of ways.
Great, thank you very much. Selena, and then I just want to warn everybody, I've got 6 more people on my list who want to ask questions. Short questions, short answers. Okay, Selena.
So my participation in SACNAS really began towards the end of my undergraduate career and has kept on going into my graduate career. I was more involved with the Native Student Professional Development Program of the Wildlife Society, and also the SEEDS program, which is under the Ecological Society of America. I believe it stands for strategies for education and ecology and diversity and sustainability. And those programs have really meant a lot to me and helped me build community going into graduate school.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, Stephen Willard. You have to unmute, Steve.
As part of my work on NSF, I went with Victor McCrary to some historically Black colleges and universities, and was amazed that although they've lived with very few resources, they've developed an incredible capacity for mentoring. Some of the finest mentoring I think could be done. And I would suggest that as papers are written and whatever, we go and study the mentoring programs at the HSBCUs.
That will actually be, Stephen, that will actually be part of our May meeting.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, Dan Reed.
Thanks, Alan. I was actually in one of the meetings when you presented the Academy's report, and I was kind of struck by the faculty reaction of, in terms of change and rebalancing power structures. And so one of my questions for the panel really is, what from your perspective would help maybe address some of this imbalance of power, which I think contributes to, frankly, sometimes the less than conducive mentoring experience that students have.
Okay, Renetta, do you want to start? Because that's in the
Yes.
domain of that report you were on.
Yes, so very quickly between that report and also the CGS PhD completion project, we found that when graduate students are trained in these different kinds of programs that have multiple mentoring structures, then they themselves, when they become faculty members, also invoke multiple mentorship structures. And so graduate training is one of those kinds of things, but also if the departments and again, the institutions would promote multiple mentorship structures and not see it as a territorial one-to-one kind of model, then that can definitely help with moving things forward and balancing the power.
Okay, I'm going to take the liberty of the moderator. We only have 5 minutes left, so I'm not going to let any other panelists answer Dan's excellent question. Suresh B, and then I think we're getting close.
So, Selena, that was hard work and everything to get to this point. So looking back at it, is there any need for S&T infrastructure in your community where a lot more people like you to get to this level? So is there any recommendations to us as a part of science and technology infrastructure? Selena said, okay.
Yeah, I would definitely say that tribal communities need capacity building in general, and access to science and technology. Quite often, tribal colleges are the only place that you can access consistent Wi-Fi. And that we see the effects of that throughout the pandemic, where even our high schoolers are having to sit in the parking lot of tribal colleges because that's the only place where the Wi-Fi is consistent enough. And also just a lot of tribal communities are rural, and so the effects on rural communities are also a lot of the effects that are just affecting Indian country as a whole. But there's also, the balance of power, I would say, is definitely something that also affects students very early on. And so teachers taking an interest in their students and also just the science community in general, reaching out and making sure that everybody has access to science, is really important for tribal communities and students that are moving up from, high school to college, and then also on to graduate school and PhD programs. And so.
Great. Thank you very much, Selena. Okay, last question goes to Panch. He gets to ask a short question and get a short answer. I would encourage people to put their remaining questions in the chat, and we'll try to get them. Panch. Unmute. That was clear. Panch, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
Sorry, I had some difficulty here, so I'm just getting said sorry about that. I wanted to say that it was a very impressive panel. Jerry, again, you did it. So we are going to have every meeting now for you to put a panel together. It's a fantastic panel.
Staff, NSB staff, okay?
Yes, staff too, yes. Everything needs a leader. So thank you so much. And every one of those comments, my question was answered. In fact, that's why I brought the question down. But I wanted to congratulate Selena. Selena, this is phenomenal. You're just an inspiration in terms of how you have navigated to this. The question I had also is, you've got an amazing president in Warren Cruzado. She's an amazing person in terms of a leader of a university. And so how much does the university provide support in this? Because you said, as you moved in here, what is the university component support that you think that, because I think there are many university leaders here that I can assure you NSF will do everything, to make sure that we are helpful and supportive, not only in the COVID situation, but even beyond COVID. COVID is only teaching us lessons of what we can do better. And so we will continue to persist and do that from NSF's perspective. But in addition to that, I was going to ask what, if any, lessons that you could impart in a very brief way from the university perspective.
Suzanne, do you want to answer that? Who would like to answer that?
I can jump in. From a student perspective, I had one person here at the university who is also a master's student herself and working dually as a staff here at the university that knew the ins and outs of things that new students need to know. Quite often, master's students come from other places, and so they don't know the lay of the land and need to know a lot of things like financial aid, housing, other, just day-to-day business that students have to keep track of. And so the university is supporting positions like that are really just for the student as a resource is really important. And I know that sometimes her position has been temporary, and so just like cementing the fact that diverse students need these support systems on a continuous basis is really important for retention and also recruitment. There's somebody that can be vital to someone's success.
So let me make one more comment before I close us. Just to answer Punch's question, there is something that both universities can do and government agencies can do. You all control the incentive system. If you don't change the incentive system, nothing's going to change. So NSF controls how you review grants, what you mention in announcements. If you say we need better mentoring, you're going to get better mentoring. It's people follow the money, as we say. With that, let me thank our fabulous panel. I think it was a great conversation. It's clear that there is much to be done. I want to second Jerry's comment about the staff because I have never seen as good staff. I miss it now that I'm unemployed. I miss having that kind of staff backup. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for the conversation. Thanks for the invitation to come.
And we'll turn it over to Ellen.
All right, thank you. And to Alan and Kenny, Renetta, Suzanne, and Selena, thank you so much for your time, the data that you brought, the call to action to all of us. I hope we can continue to engage with you as we move forward with our own issues on this, our own efforts on this critical issue. I'm sorry we didn't quite get to all the questions. Matt, I saw your hand up, and but I hope we can continue on as we develop this. So thanks for a rich discussion.